I'm one of the money-grabbing bastards that trying to make a quid out of this thing. Look, I'm not going to talk a lot about soil carbon for the first, probably one of the few people that won't. What I want to do is have a chat about how the rubber hits the road. Largely carbon, the problem that we have with the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is largely caused by industry, largely caused by the northern hemisphere, and we feel the brunt of it down here, but it is essentially a market-based problem in that companies and consumers do not pay for the externalities that are created by the manufacturing and consumption process. Being a market-based problem, we need to find market-based solutions. So, there are three core drivers of climate action. First one is government policy. There are international agreements that force us, like the Paris Agreement, to set national targets. Those national targets, we then set into our own domestic policies. And basically, the concept behind carbon trading is to let the market decide where the best investment is. Where am I going to get the best bang for my buck for the investment in trying to mitigate climate change by reducing the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases in the atmosphere? So government policy is a key one, and this is one of the biggest bugbears I've ever had in my 15-year career in carbon trading, is that everything can change with the swipe of a pen, the decision of a policy. It can completely change everything you're doing. I was getting maybe 50 to 100 hits on my website up to about 2009. They delayed the carbon pollution reduction scheme. Anyone remember that, the CPRS? And delayed that, my hits went down to about 5 a day, just stopped. They brought out the Carbon Farming Initiative in 2010, bang, up it went again. So it's very policy-based. The next one is consumer demand. Lots of people are starting to say, well, we want to see good corporate social responsibility, we want to see you actually doing something about it, and consumers are starting to demand that people take action on climate change. And it's not individuals as well. What we're seeing, particularly from overseas, is large investment funds, such as pension funds out of Holland or the Netherlands, Britain, etc., are saying that we want to see the carbon addressed in your risk portfolios. I won't go into it. And the third one in business engagement, which is responding to the consumer demand. So what this creates is basically two very distinct markets. One we call the mandatory market, and the other one's the voluntary market, and these behave very differently. The mandatory market is the one that is directed by government policies, such as the carbon tax or the carbon pollution reduction scheme, and now we have the what's it called now? The direct action approach, the emissions reduction fund. So these domestic emissions reduction fund, we also have what's called the domestic NCOS voluntary market, which is the National Carbon Offset Scheme, which is the government's official process or official way of claiming your carbon neutrality. If you're going to claim you're carbon neutral, then you need to be sure that you are carbon neutral. It's not a term that I would bandy around easily, because there are experts out there that could pick you to pieces to prove you're not carbon neutral. The secondary, and then you've got the secondary market. The secondary market is more of a voluntary market. There is also a safeguard market in there which falls under the mandatory thing. But the secondary market is where companies that don't have to act, or people don't have to act, decide to act for various reasons, being it consumer demand or etc. But these markets act very differently, and there is some crossover in them. I've got other Venn diagrams that make it look a bit different. So, as farmers, how do you make a quid out of this? Well, you want to get into those marketplaces, and just before, like, you know where you're going to sell your grain generally before you get there, you know where you're going to sell your cattle. Carbon's a bit different. Has anyone seen a carbon credit? No. I've been doing it 15 years, I'm yet to see one. All right, because you're actually dealing with a series of numbers in the registry somewhere. It's not like a product that you can pick up and take down the road and give to a market, sell in the cattle yards or anything else like that. It is a very different market. You can't actually, it's not about putting food on the plate, it's not about people putting clothes on people's backs, and it's a lot of farmers and a lot of people have a little bit of difficulty getting to it. It's not even like water trading, because you can actually see the water when it comes out of your pipes. So, hey? When it exists, yeah. Sorry, sometimes you turn on the pipe and dust comes out. That's happy. So when you look at where do we get where do we actually get this sort of, where do we get the money? All right, let's get down to the cold hard business case. What we're talking about is you look for sources and sinks. All right, where are the sources of emissions on your property? Okay, where is it coming from? Where is the emissions going into the atmosphere? Is it your fertiliser and manure management? Is it enteric fermentation, deforestation? What's causing the emissions to come out? How the hell do I stop them? Right? You're on your road to creating money out of this. Or you look at your sinks. Where's my native plantings, agroforestry? Look at human-induced regeneration. There is a critical difference between these two. If you stop the enteric fermentation and you reduce the amount of methane that comes out of a cow, you've stopped it. It never goes into the atmosphere. But if you take that out of the atmosphere and you store it in your soil or you store it in your vegetation, then you've got a permanence obligation. You have to keep it out of the atmosphere for 100 years. All right? Now that makes a big difference in how these two sides operate. You have a long-term liability with the sequestration, you have virtually no liability under the sources, under the emissions. So, if you want to have a look at how do we actually make money, what you need to do, and this is the key point, you need to prove a change in the carbon associated with a parcel of land over time. What would have happened as to what will happen. So if you look at the graph on the left there, the difference between a business as usual emissions profile and a with measures profile, that gap is your carbon credits. Not from the bottom to there or to there, it is the gap in between. So it's the difference you make through a change in management practice. That is critical. Most schemes, all schemes around the world look at that. So when we start to look at this and break it down, drill down a little bit further, where's the money going to come from? All right, because all well and good to do a lot of work, but if you're not going to get paid for it, it makes it tough. And the thing about Australia is a lot of people talk about Australian agriculture being carbon neutral, or the aim of it. Well, it pretty much bloody well is. We only produce around about in 2017, 60 odd million tonnes. Now, there's a hell of a lot more forestry already going on in Western New South Wales and Western Queensland to cover that. Trouble is, it's all being sold to industry and to the government. When you break it down a little bit further, or have a look at this, we're actually doing the good work. If you look at what agriculture has done, it's dropped its emission profile by 78% since 1990. Agriculture has already done the heavy lifting. It's bought us time. We didn't get paid for it, unfortunately. So when you look at the percentage of emissions that actually come just from agriculture, it's only 11%. It's always bundled up with mining. All right, and mining's more. Mining's another 15%. So if you look at those emissions, and I hope this consolidates a few other people's slides, but where's the opportunities? Where am I going to make money? Well, where are the sources? Where are the sinks? Where are the sources? Enteric fermentation is by far the biggest. One thing that I haven't heard, well, probably because I wasn't listening, but haven't heard is about enteric fermentation. One, it's good to stop the methane coming out. But when you do that, you're actually converting more of your feed to meat or milk or whatever the product is. So there's an important aspect of that. When you look at other parts of it, agricultural soils is not that big a deal. It's only about 15 million tonnes. This is where it comes out. That's assuming we can get rid of all of it. So they're not huge numbers. When it comes to the actual market, the biggest game in town is the Emission Reduction Fund. Has everyone heard of that, I presume? You will be tested on this later, so please. The Emission Reduction Fund's about a $2.5 billion fund. Now, can I just ask a show of hands, who was anti the carbon tax? No one in the room? Come on. I've been doing this for 15 years. I was damn near lynched most of the time when I was getting out around these places. I'll tell you, the fact of the matter is what we're operating under now is essentially the same process. There is a safeguard mechanism in the current Direct Emissions Reduction Fund or the Direct Action Plan that if a company exceeds its emissions, it needs to go and buy offsets. All right, we got an order yesterday for 40,000 tonnes. All right, and that's just one company. All right, and there's plenty more of them out there. But if you look at the Emissions Reduction Fund, essentially this is your taxes being paid to other farmers to sequester carbon or to stop emissions. And when you look at that, they purchase the emissions reductions, they credit projects, and they safeguard against the emissions. And these are the auctions that have occurred. This was 2014, 15, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. And it's pretty clear that we're already starting to see a reduction in the number of projects and the millions of tonnes that are being purchased by the government because all the low-hanging fruit's already been picked. Out of all the projects that are out there, in the first auction, a lot of this was landfill gas. So all the tips and landfills got covered, they captured the methane, they converted it to electricity or they flared it. A lot of it's there. The second and third and fourth auctions are pretty much vegetation. Most of it's vegetation. In particular, the third auction was a lot of soil carbon. Around about 40 to 45 million tonnes was promised to the government to be delivered between now and 10 years' time, or actually 7 years' time from now. I don't know how it's going to get delivered, but as you can see, over time, the amount that's been offered by the farmers and by the suppliers has dropped, and the price has gone up. Interestingly, this auction, the seventh auction, which happened just recently, $13.52. The order we got, the trade that we saw go through yesterday, was 20,000 tonnes at $15.50. So the secondary market is already well and truly above this one. So if people who sold their carbon at $10 and $11 in the first auction, and many did, if they'd held it, might have been looking at $15 now. The secondary market, this is where a lot of the voluntary activity occurs. So companies that want to make that point of difference at point of sale, they want to see that it's fit for purpose, all right? The last thing they want is reputational damage. They don't want something Mickey Mouse. They love the stuff that's been verified by governments or independent third parties. Usually they want issued and compliant. They want no problems with it. Price is always a factor, more important in the mandatory market, but definitely in the secondary market as well, in the voluntary market. Quite often in the voluntary market, you've got to tell the story. Really big on Indigenous involvement at the moment. That's what the market's saying. We want Indigenous involvement, we want environmental benefits, and we want the carbon credits. I can tell you though, nearly always by the time you get to talk to the CFO about it, or the Chief Financial Officer, they want to see the bottom line. Parcel size is important. Generally, the bigger market players want a lot more. They don't want little 1 tonne here, 2 tonne there, 3 tonne there. They want large volumes. They want to write a cheque. They want to sign the documents. They want to get it done and move on. They definitely want low risk, and they do not want to invest in startups. It's very rare to find someone who'll actually back a project from day dot. Generally, they'll just wait until the end, until you've delivered, and away you go. So the next, I don't know how I'm going for time, but I must be close, wouldn't I? Okay. Righto. So when it comes to actual carbon farming, and you've got to remember this is carbon and farming, not carbon or farming. You're meant to be actually able to do both, and I think that's being demonstrated. For example, with soil carbon, right? As I mentioned, there's 45 million tonnes roughly that is to be delivered. So far, they've delivered 400 tonnes. It's going to be a very tough gig for them to deliver it until we can get things like soil sequest, which sounds fantastic, get that up and running. Because the simple fact of the matter is the methodologies are very difficult. To actually generate a carbon credit takes a bit of work. And because, as I said, it's not something you can pick up and give to someone. You've actually got to prove that you've done something. So when we look at integrated carbon farming, and I don't know why this slide's gone that way, but what you start to look at is all the different approaches. You can have soil carbon, manure management, fertiliser management, crop residue management, revegetation. Converting to electricity. Now you've got things like solar plants, wind farms, etc. There's a whole lot of things you can do. But I can tell you, if you're managing your soil carbon, you're managing the methane coming off your manure, you're doing proper fertilisation and looking at the synchronisation of how you put the fertiliser on your soil, you're managing your crop residue better and doing revegetation, the cross-production benefits are almost going to outweigh the carbon value. And you're doing it for a lot of good reasons. So when you look at that, the first thing that I stress is whole farm planting. It is one of the most important things any farmer could do on their property, is to understand. We've had other presenters say about measuring and monitoring. Do it over the whole property. Have a look at where you can actually do some of these activities. Find the decisions and support tools. There are a lot of them out there. There is a lot of ways you can actually calculate where the best benefits are. Where are my highest emissions? Where are my best returns likely to be? Seek the management support. 15 years ago, there was probably half a dozen of us doing this. Now, there's hundreds of people, and they've all been educated, they've all learnt, many of them have grown up in this industry now, and they have some excellent support for you. Minimise risks, administrative obligations and administrative burden. That's specifically looking at sequestration. All right, so if you're putting the carbon in the soil or in the trees, remember you have that long-term management commitment to it. And that may affect property sales, but because it's a long-term benefit or a long-term liability, you need to have the consent of the bank, anyone who's got a native title claim on the place, state government if you're leasehold, all right? Anyone who's got a vested interest in the land, even if it's Aunt Betty in a nursing home somewhere, you've got to get that consent, and it's a big, difficult one to get at times. So you put all that together, and you create an integrated carbon farm, you might even get some money out of it. As I mentioned, in conclusion, this is what I've dealt with, all right? And And I'll give you one good thing. Apart from this lot, there was no rabbits, because getting trees growing with rabbits is interesting. But when Julia Gillard won in 2010, listening to Rob Oakeshott talk for 17 minutes before he told us who was he going to support was one of the most incredible times of my life. Because over that 17 minutes, I waned from my business is dead to my business is booming. My business is dead, my business is booming. And I talked to Tony Windsor about it not long ago, who was actually standing next to him when he was doing the speech. He said, I got up there and I got out with my little piece of paper and said, I'm going to support the Gillard government. And then he got up with 17 pages. And he said, oh God, I wish I'd bought a drink. So the fact of the matter is that it's a policy-driven environment. To create carbon credits takes a fair bit of work. You need to be able to prove it. You need to be in for the long haul, but most of the benefits are going to come from those cross-production benefits and a far greater understanding of the environmental processes on your farm, of which carbon is just one. And with that, I'll leave you. Thank you very much.